My name is Caleb. I'm the youth and young adult pastor, and I have the opportunity of speaking whatever I want to you today. So I'm kind of continuing my own little mini-series. I touched on this as I was doing the Area 57 sleepover weekend. I kind of thought this was a good theme, and so I think that was like a month ago. I was able to share on Saturday night with the preteens, and I shared Sunday morning about this idea of running to win. And I thought, why not do a third sermon and continue the series for your sake? For you guys, it's the second sermon. And if you haven't watched the first one, you can go back and watch it. But I thought we'd go with running to win. And today we're talking about running restfully. Everyone just give me a deep sigh of rest. Good start. Good start. How many of you, if you're being completely honest with me, have gone the wrong pace in your life? In any situation, maybe it's driving a car, maybe it's just you got too much going on at work. Anybody would honestly admit you've gone the wrong pace in life and it hasn't gone so well, okay? Thank you for being honest, appreciate that. This one time, I know it's summer, but on Christmas Eve, I'm just bringing us to Christmas just to keep us humble. So Christmas Eve, a few years ago, we were heading down from Williams Lake to Abbotsford for Christmas holidays. And we had stopped into this one little town called Boston Bar, and that is a place that exists in BC. I did not know it existed until I drove through it for the first time. But Boston Bar, it's a place. And we stopped in Boston Bar because my kids were screaming. It was late. We were heading down Christmas Eve day. And it had been a long drive so far. If you guys know anything about traveling with kids, it's not like traveling with adults. It's a lot more stops, a lot more screaming, and a lot more crying. And anyways, we stop into Boston Bar to give ourselves an emotional break. And we use the washroom, we get some snacks, we give the kids some snacks, we regroup, and we get ready for the rest of our trip. And if you know anything about driving to Williams Lake, to the Cariboo, to northern BC, you'll know that there's a lot of little towns along the way. And you'll go from highway speed to 60 kilometers to highway speed to more than highway speed to 60 kilometers, and it changes all throughout your drive depending on where you're at. So you have to pay attention to what the speed limits are. In case you aren't very good at that, it's a very important thing when you're doing that drive. Because, spoiler alert, something bad happened. I got back in the car, we got our kids buckled up, and we got ready to go back on the road. And we were in the middle of Boston Bar, context. We had slowed down to 60 kilometers into the town. And we get back in the car, and this was like an hour later. We had taken a good break for our kids' sake. And we started to get onto the road, and I sped up to highway speed. Oh boy, I heard it. Oh boy. And this is Christmas Eve, guys, so there's a context here. Flashing red and blue lights, and the police officer pulls us over. And he says, "Sir, you're going over the speed limit. It's a 60-kilometer zone. You're going 90 kilometers an hour. And if you know anything about speeding tickets, that's not a good place to be." And he told me that. But then he heard my kids screaming and crying, and he knew that it was Christmas Eve, and so he had grace on us. He didn't impound our van, thankfully, and he let us continue our trip with just a minor speeding ticket. But man, I was going the wrong pace at the wrong time, and it was not good. But here's the thing, guys. I think for a lot of us in life, as some of you have already admitted, we often can find ourselves going the wrong pace. We haven't slowed down enough to recharge or to regroup or to really pace ourselves into the rhythm of life as God has probably created it to be. Rest and sleep are funny things in our culture, if we're being honest, right? There's different people that have different views on rest. Like, depending on who your friends are or who's in the room, you kind of talk about your rest or your lack of rest in a different way, right? Because not getting sleep can be a regret to some people or a sign of success to others, right? Or sleeping in can be something that lazy people do or something that healthy people do. Depending on who your friends are, rest is seen in different ways. We've all heard people say, "I couldn't sleep last night. I'm so nervous for a blank event or blank thing that's going on." For some people, lack of sleep is a sign of stress. For some people, lack of sleep is a sign of excitement. Christmas Eve, again, going back to Christmas. Why are we talking about Christmas in summer? It just happened to work out that way. Christmas Eve is a prime example of a restless night that is meant to be from excitement. You can't sleep. You're so excited for Christmas Day. I've experienced that with my kids and myself. For some people, lack of sleep is a sign of success. And even still, for a lot of people, they say, man, I pulled an all-nighter last night. I got so much done. I got this done. I got that done. I only got 3 to 4 hours of sleep, and that's good. I'm having a good night. And there's some celebrities that would even say that that's their normal. Every day they get 2 to 4 hours of sleep, and that's how they succeed. That's how they succeed. That's how they're winning at life. Do you guys know that giraffes sleep 1.5 hours a day? Oh, to be a giraffe and be productive. They're probably not very productive. They aren't. They grow, and that's pretty much all they do. But on this view of sleep and rest, there are some who work and never take a day off, and they work their overtime, and they brag about not taking a holiday in over 3 or 5 years, and that is success to them, is a lack of rest, lack of holidays. And if we're bringing that all back to real life, our day-to-day, sleep and rest are funny things, because some of us feel bad for sleeping in, some of us wish we could sleep in, and some of us sleep in too much, if we're being honest. But this just in, we all need sleep. We all need rest, and most of us are not getting enough sometimes. Because if we're being honest, we live in a world of hurry. Hurry. And the things like sleep, rest, and going slow aren't productive, valuable, or maybe prioritized in our culture. And for many years, this idea of slow has been seen as a negative thing, as a knock against people. These are the first 2 definitions of slow, and I'm not making this up. These are the first 2 definitions of slow, Merriam-Webster. And it says mentally dull, stupid, naturally inert or sluggish, lacking in readiness, promptness, or willingness. Ouch. Right? Slow is not seen as a good thing. And in the dictionary itself, the first 2 definitions are not casting slow in a very positive light. And we sometimes get the cultural message that slow is bad and fast is good. But let me encourage you with this morning. God created us to run restfully, not restlessly. Not restlessly, but restfully. And while the devil would love if you kept on hurrying, God's example and commands to us are to run our race, to live our lives, to do our jobs, to parent our children in a way that is rested and dependent on him. And so God didn't create us just to work and slave to the end of our days. He created us in creation that we might actually enjoy it and live. Do you guys know that? With that in mind, here's a follow-up question. What's your pace? Or another way of putting it is, what's the rhythm for you guys, for your life, for your families? Day to day, week to week, month to month, what's your rhythm? What's your pace? And depending on your approach to life, your pace, your system of your life is either creating a rhythm of rest or it's creating a rhythm of restlessness that leads you in the opposite direction towards apathy, exhaustion, and eventually burnout. As we've agreed, the North American culture we're in promotes an endless pursuit of happiness and success where we work now and we play later. And in some senses, that can be a good thing. But if we're being honest, our world at large tends to value production over people, doing over being, hurrying over slowing down. But we aren't the only ones who live in a world full of hurry. You see, in Jesus' day, Rome was busy expanding their kingdom, building roads and highways to strengthen their trade routes. The Jewish religion was strong and thriving under Rome with various groups of all shapes and sizes. And in Jesus' own journey and ministry, he butted heads with Pharisees and others who saw him doing things on the Sabbath that they thought he shouldn't have been doing. And in their minds, Jesus was breaking the Sabbath. He was misunderstanding God's intention for rest. And yet Jesus turns the tables on them and helps us appreciate God's place for rest in our lives, slowing down and stopping as a rhythm for our lives. So Sabbath, have you guys ever heard that word before? We probably have. Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, meaning to cease or to stop, or as we understand it, to rest from our work. Sabbath was held as a weekly rhythm in keeping with God's fourth commandment out in the 10 commandments that he gave his people. He says to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you will labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And even before that, God set the precedent in creation. He created creation for 6 days, and on the seventh day, God rested. Before we take another step, you might challenge the idea of keeping the Sabbath with a number of reasons. One, you might say we're not Jewish, we're Christians, and there's no command to keep the Sabbath in the New Testament. Another thought might be that Jesus fulfilled the requirements of the law, so why would we have to do this? Why is this so important? And three, you guys might think Satan doesn't sleep, so why should we? But the truth is that, well, it's not going to save you. Jesus has done the work, right, to make us right with God, but there's no rules or commandments outside of what Jesus has done for us, following him, having faith in him, that's going to save us. And you don't have to keep the Sabbath, but Jesus did say that he came to give us rest. He says, come all you who are weary, and I will give you rest. So there's something that Jesus says about rest in the New Testament. And while we shouldn't try to match Satan's lack of sleep, there's something there where he's probably the devil because he doesn't have sleep, right? Yeah. And so let's not try to use these as excuses to get away from the value for rest. And whether it's the tortoise and hare, slow and steady wins the race, or other quotables like haste makes waste, we see the importance of rest all around us. Athletes understand the balance of working and working out and resting in tandem with each other. Babies and toddlers sleep more than any other stage of life because they are growing the most. It's why breaks are mandatory for 8-hour shifts. Well, you might want to give up on this 1 day a week idea. Hear me out today. We need this. We need rest. Rest is good. Say that with me. Rest is good. All right? If you get anything from this morning, that's what I want you to get. But let's appreciate it a bit more and understand its place in our lives beyond just a day to catch up on sleep. The first thing I want us to realize is that when it comes to rest, it is a rhythm for all of life, for all of creation. Turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 2, if you have your Bibles. Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 to 3. And it'll be up on the screen here if you don't have it. It says, on the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. As we've already covered, Sabbath is about stopping, ceasing, and desisting. God finished his work and rested and stopped doing it. And yet this day was unique from others for a number of reasons. The first reason it was unique is that, well, the first 3 days were about order coming out of chaos. The next 3 days were about God filling the order. The seventh day stood on its own. And if you were to actually look into it more in depth, it's interesting in that day 1 and day 4 go hand in hand, because God brought light into darkness, and on day 4 he created different light to separate day and night. He created the sun and the moon. In day 2, God created waters below, waters above, which is the creation of the sky or the heavens. And on day 5, God created sky and water creatures, so that, again, they're paired together. And on day 3, dry land emerges from the waters, plants and fruit trees emerge from the land, and the land brought forth vegetation. And yet on day 6, we see this parallel with that beast emerged from the land. Man is created to rule the land, and the land brought forth beasts. And yet the seventh day stands on its own. And in a way, it's actually written by the writer of Genesis in a climactic sense, in that after these 3 pairs that mirror each other, that go together, the seventh day stands on its own. It's important. It's climactic. It's the point. The second reason why the seventh day stands out is that it's mentioned 3 times, whereas the other days are mentioned once. And it's not only mentioned 3 times, it's mentioned 3 times back to back to back in this text that we just read. And so it's highlighting this importance because if we read the rest of the Bible, the number 3 speaks to completeness. The Trinity is the prime example. They're complete. There's a community. There's a value for the number 3. And so 3 times is probably a good sign that this is important. The third reason why the seventh day stands out is that the first thing in all of the Bible that is sanctified and set apart is the seventh day. God chose to choose this seventh day, this thing, to be holy and set apart first before anything else. And lastly, the seventh day, the end of the creation account, goes hand in hand with the beginning of the creation account. In a way, it puts brackets around the creation story. Because in verse 1 and 2 of chapter 1, we see that the heaven and the earth were formless and empty. And then at the end of that, at the beginning of chapter 2, we see that they are now filled and finished, and then the seventh day is mentioned. And so after creation is complete, we get to this seventh day, and we realize that there's so much more here than what we read in Sunday school, right? Your Sunday school teacher probably didn't tell you what I just told you. But the reality is the seventh day is so important. Scholar Michael Morales helps us summarize what I just read in this short sentence. And he says, the seventh day is justly interpreted as the fulfillment, the purpose, and the end of the story in Genesis 1, the goal of the whole creative process. Compared to creation accounts from other ancient Near Eastern religions, which would share similar accounts of creation to try and explain what happened, their gods were not like our God. Because different from our God, their gods created creation in their account, and then they rested and made their creation work for them. And yet, in our creation account, which is unique from all the other ones, God worked and he invited creation to rest and have a relationship with him. From creation to the Ten Commandments God had given the Israelites, he insisted that rest is a rhythm to follow and keep. In Exodus chapter 20, we read, remember the Sabbath day, keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, your son and daughter, nor your male or female servant, not even your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, underline that, circle that, therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. In Exodus 31, verse 17, we read that it will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was, let's all say this together, refreshed. He was rested and he was refreshed. 1 day's rest in 7 is a built-in, from creation, a built-in rhythm that God has created for us. To be refreshed, to literally catch our breath. I was sitting over here this morning, and if you guys didn't know, there was a breeze over there, so next Sunday, just make sure you sit over there. But there was a breeze. And man, during worship, I was so cool and so refreshed sitting over there. But God creates rest for us as his creation to give us refreshing, to give us rest, to help us to literally catch our breath. And with Sabbath as part of the creation story, we see its importance for all of creation, not just for you and I, but as we saw in Exodus chapter 20, for your family, for your animals, for all of creation, there is something about rest. There's this story, and this is an illustration, it's made up, but one man challenged another to an all-day wood chopping competition to see who could cut the most wood. The challenger worked very hard, stopping only for a brief lunch break, and he was chopping along and trying to get as much wood as he could cut. And yet, at the end of the day, the challenger was surprised and annoyed to find that the other guy had had more wood chopped than him. I don't get it, he said. Every time I checked, you were taking a rest, yet you chopped more wood than I did. But you didn't notice, said the winning competitor, that I was sharpening my axe whenever I sat down to rest. What we in the Challenger miss is that rest is a part of a necessary rhythm of work and life and with God. It's a small change of perspective that has major benefits in that we don't just live to work. Work is part of life for all of us, no matter who you are, but work isn't the only point of life. As God himself shows us here, he worked towards rest, which is a small perspective shift. He did not just rest so that he could work. Are you hearing that? He did not just rest so that he could work. He worked towards rest. The seventh day was the climax of creation. And so rest is not a means to work. It's the reason for our work. We work towards rest, and our work will be even better when we see rest as more than a good idea, but the main idea. The second thing we see in Scripture about rest is that rest is for us. Mark chapter 2, verse 27, Jesus says, "Man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for man." Before Jesus was born, the Jews had gotten into adding hundreds of extra rules and regulations to help them follow their rules and laws that God had given them. And what had happened in the hundreds of years prior to Jesus, that Jews went into times of exile where their identity as a nation, as a people, their faith was at stake. They were not able to have their regular place of worship and their offerings and so on. And yet the one thing they were able to continue to do, no matter where they were as a people, no matter when they were in exile, was this practice of Sabbath. You can see it even in the World War II, in that the Jewish people practiced Sabbath even amidst the Holocaust and the tragedies that happened there. And many would attest to the fact that Sabbath was a vital part of the strength that they found to continue to persevere in the midst of great opposition. And so back before Jesus' day, they had practiced Sabbath and emphasized Sabbath more than probably a lot of other things, because it was the one connection to God that they could have in a foreign land amidst exile where they had nothing else they could do. But despite their best efforts to preserve Sabbath, they swung the direction a bit too far. And they tried to add all these extra rules to make Sabbath even better, to make it even more important, to make it even more particular for those that were following this religion. And yet, in Jesus' day, Jesus pointed out that this had become a burden for the people, that the Sabbath was, amongst the other rules, a heavy weight that the people could not bear because they had added all these extras that God had not originally intended them to have. And the heart of Sabbath was never for it to be a burden to bear. It was meant to be a time that not only we stopped and played, but we ate and we had fun and we enjoyed our family and our friends and our community. And so Jesus says, as I mentioned in Mark 2, verse 27, that the Sabbath was not made for us to serve it, but we have the Sabbath serve us. And our struggle with rest is that sometimes we try to serve it instead of letting it serve us. A sermon like this might cause different emotions for different people in this room. You might be thinking to yourself, man, I don't know if I can do this. I don't got the time for a break. And for some of you guys, you might be getting anxious at the thought of trying to make room for a day off because of all the things that you have to do. And let me just encourage you and pause for a second here and say that this is not meant to stress you out. This is not meant to make you feel bad. This is meant to give you a tool that God is hopefully wanting you to take advantage of so that you can find rest in your life. And so get this, when I say that Sabbath is important, it is made for you. It is not made for you to serve it. So let it serve you. Do not serve it. I think of my pets that I've had. I had this one pet, a guinea pig named Chester. Chester was orange and large and loud and very fast. And if you guys know anything about guinea pigs, they do not make good pets. I had bought him as my first real pet, a step up from my fish that I had, some guppies, a couple years before. He came with a big plastic cage, kind of like a big rectangle, and it kind of kept him in there. He didn't escape, fortunately. But every night, if you didn't know this, guinea pigs can be nocturnal. Every night, Chester would run laps and get his workout in. And we'd hear this all night long. And I lived in a family with 5 other people. So we had a house full of 6 people that were listening to Chester, the guinea pig, every night for 3 weeks straight. And nobody got good rest. And yet I was trying to make it work. I was trying to make this thing work, and I could not make it work. And unfortunately, I didn't love Chester that much. So after a few weeks of this nocturnal squeaking and running machine, keeping the whole house up, I couldn't take it any longer. I gave up, and I gave him back to the pet store. But here's the thing about Chester and Sabbath rest, and I hope you get this. They're not the same thing. Sabbath is not a pet. We cannot treat the Sabbath like a pet. We don't feed it or serve it or do whatever it takes to make it happy or sleep or be quiet, right? Sabbath is not a pet that we serve or something that we serve. Sabbath is for us. And if the idea of Sabbath stresses you out, make sure that you deal with the normal, uncomfortable things first. There are some uncomforts, some discomforts to Sabbath, and here's a few of them. 1, it is disruptive. Honestly, it is disruptive. It forces you to plan ahead and prioritize your time and schedule around it, to take a day off. Without planning, it'll become neglected and more work than rest because you're scrambling to figure out what you want to do. Make your plans ahead of time. Plan ahead. Make sure that it is a priority, and it is a bit disruptive. Second, it is countercultural. In a lot of senses, it goes against the grain of the world that we live in. As we talked about, we live in a world of hurry. And yet, as much as it's countercultural, Jesus calls us out of cultural to follow his way. And so that's important too. And thirdly, we see that it's actually humbling. It's a weekly reminder that you are not God. You are not in control of your life. As much as we might have the illusion that we're in control, Sabbath is an amazing and humbling and formational experience every week that encourages you to let go and to say, God, as much as I am worried about this, or this, I trust that you are actually on your throne, that you are actually in control. And it's a weekly reminder to humble you and keep you in perspective of exactly who your God is and who you are. So outside of these healthy feelings of discomfort, rest in the wrong place is in the wrong place if it is leaving you stressed, if it's making you uncomfortable, if it is leaving you tired. That's not the point of Sabbath. It's not meant to tire you out and exhaust you and discourage you. It's meant to help you. Prioritizing rest should not stress you, but it will stretch you for the better. Do you guys understand that? It's not meant to stress you. It's not meant to be a weight that you wear, but there is some work that goes into it. And when you put the work in, it's worth it. And it will stretch you and help you and grow you to become more like Jesus. Lastly, we see that rest is a reminder of redemption. In Deuteronomy 5, verse 12 to 15, the 10 Commandments are given, and God says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And he goes down to say, remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Just note here that what is getting focused in on here is that they were slaves. And yet, Sabbath was a way to remember what God had done, what God had freed them from. The first time God gave these commandments in Exodus 20, as we already read, the overarching goal was that these would be lived through Israel as an example to the other nations. But here in Deuteronomy 5, the direction here is to Israel as God's redeemed people. God is speaking to them and saying, when you do Sabbath, when you remember Sabbath, when you stop and rest, it's not actually just a point to catch your breath. It's actually a way to remember what I've done for you. Walter Elwell writes in the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible that Sabbath is God's signpost that points not only to his goodness, to all creation as their creator, but to his mercy towards his chosen people as their redeemer. You see, there's something amazing about Sabbath in that it serves as a signpost. It serves as a reminder for us that not only did God create us to have rest, but God redeems us. God is our rescuer. God is our savior. And rest is a gift from God, again, as a rhythm for life and work, but it's also a weekly and regular reminder of the spiritual rest he gave us through Jesus. You see, Jesus saves us. Jesus is our Redeemer. And a lot of us experience this redemption story in our lives, but have you actually taken time to remember your redemption story? Because that was part of Sabbath for God's people, was taking a time to remember how he rescued them from their slavery. And the same is true for us today. The difference is that our slavery is not just to a nation, it was to our sinful nature. And Jesus gives us rest from that. In Matthew chapter 11, Jesus says something so amazing, and I was telling Amy last night, this is one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible. And he says this, "My Father has entrusted everything to me. No one truly knows the Son except the Father, and no one truly knows the Father except the Son and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal to him." Notice that, just go back for a second. Notice that Jesus says, "My Father has entrusted everything to me." We also read in the last section of Mark chapter 2 that Jesus said that he was Lord of the Sabbath. There's something about Sabbath where Jesus is actually part of the Trinity. Jesus is actually God. And so Sabbath is actually something that he is overseeing and in charge of. And we continue in chapter 28. And then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Notice the word come. That's the invitation. Jesus invites you to come to him if you're tired, if you're discouraged. And what he's talking about here, the heavy burdens, as I mentioned, Jesus rebukes the Pharisees in other parts of the New Testament, talking about how they bind up and put on heavy loads on the people of God, the Israelites at that time, that they cannot carry. They had added all these extra rules to almost make it so that they had to earn their place with God. And Jesus was speaking against that and saying, "I'm going to give you a real rest." And he continues, "Take my yoke upon you," the yoke being a tool used in farming to tie two oxen together. And Jesus is saying, "Take my yoke, so work with me, beside me. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls." I want rest for my soul. I don't know about you guys. I want rest to the deepest part of who I am. And he says, "For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." He talks about taking this yoke upon us. And again, it's not an egg yoke. It's a yoke that is about work, but resting in the midst of work, learning in the midst of the work that Jesus is doing with us. And while we can find true rest in Jesus, it's a rest, he says, that happens in the rhythm of work. And then as Lord as the Sabbath, Jesus is inviting us to come. He says this idea of come in another section in John chapter 7 where he says, "Come to me, all you who are thirsty." He talks about this in John chapter 6 where he says, "The Father gives those to me that will come to me, and whoever comes to me I will never drive away." And so there's this idea of coming that is so important throughout Scripture, where Jesus' invitation to come is an invitation to find rest, to find refreshing, to find belonging. We need to rest to be at our best. We need days off, we need holidays, and our families need us rested. Our friends need you rested. Our Father needs you rested. And I love this quote by Augustine, where he says, "Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in thee." Our hearts are restless until they find our rest in our Creator, in God. And that is the way God has designed it. Unless we find ourselves close to God, resting with God, we will be restless. And God has not created you to run restlessly. God has created you to run rest fully. I believe that when we slow down, not only to regain our strength, but to enjoy God and his creation and remind ourselves of our salvation story, it helps us to live and to love like Jesus. I'm going to invite the worship team up at this point. Because Jesus was never in a hurry. If you read the Gospels, you'll find that Jesus almost annoyed people at times because of how quickly they wanted him to go. And yet Jesus went at his own pace, and it was the pace of rest and grace, trusting in God's timing, trusting that his Father was going to direct him. And Jesus was never interrupted. Do you find yourselves getting annoyed when people interrupt you? Jesus was never interrupted. No matter who it was, no matter what the situation was, Jesus was never interrupted. And somehow he managed to live a life of love and met people's needs in a powerful way at the same time. And God's love has never been rushed. Love in and of itself needs to be slow and unhurried, focused and intentional, presence over productive. So let's slow down together for a moment here. I'm going to invite you guys as the worship team gets ready to close your eyes for a minute, just for 1 minute. And I just want to pray for you as you close your eyes. Because I believe, as I mentioned, that rushing wind during worship, the breeze that was coming, I believe that some of you are in need of refreshing today. I believe that some of you are tired, as Darcy mentioned, burned out, burnt, feeling like you're a pile of ashes that needs to come to life. And I believe that at times, the reason we get to that place is because we're trying to run restlessly, as if we have to make it to the end and we have to just try harder, we just have to work harder, we just have to be smarter. And yet God's invitation to us is to run restfully with him in a rhythm of rest every week, every day even. And so Lord, I pray for my friends, for my brothers and sisters in this room today. Lord, I pray that you would breathe your rest and your life into them today. Lord, that you'd help us to realize that rest is a rhythm that you've created for all of your creation. That from the very beginning, Lord, that you meant it to be something that we enjoy and operate out of, not work against. Lord, I thank you that rest is for us. Lord, it's not something that we serve, but it serves our needs and helps us in the way that works best. And Lord, I thank you ultimately that rest is a reminder of our redemption. That Jesus, you invite us to an eternal rest where no matter our sin, no matter our brokenness, we can come to you and find that your grace is enough, that your power works best in our weakness, and you invite us to come. You invite us to come if we are thirsty, to come if we're carrying a heavy load, to come and find belonging in you. And so, Jesus, I pray that if there's anyone here today that is restless, that is tired, that is discouraged, that we would find our rest in you. That we find that our hearts are restless until we find our rest in you. And so, Lord, I pray that you would be our rest, that you'd help us to figure out ways and that we can find rest day to day, week to week, month to month, in every year, Lord, that we'd value our vacation and our holidays, but realize that it's not just about getting the times off, but it's about how we work together with our work and our rest and back and forth, and that there's a rhythm that you've created that we can walk in so that we're not desperate for our times off, but that we're not hateful towards our work, but that we enjoy it all with you. And so, Lord, I pray that you bless my friends with your rest, that a rest that is for our souls, to our core. And you'd help us, Lord, to find that you are our foundation, you are our hope, and you are enough. No matter how tired we are, that you refresh us in Jesus' name today. And everyone said, amen. Amen. Well, let's sing this together, that Christ is our firm foundation.
Yeah, would you stand? Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaken. I've never been more glad I put my faith in Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would he fail now? He won't. He won't. I've still got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense, so I won't be going under. I'm not held by my own strength, 'cause I built my life on Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful in every season. So why would he fail now? He won't. He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaken. I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would he fail now? He won't. He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. He won't. Sing this with me. Rain came, wind blew, my house was built on you. I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make it through. Rain came, wind blew, my house was built on you. I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make it through. I'm gonna make it through. 'Cause my house was built on you. I'm gonna make it through. 'Cause I'm standing strong. Sing that again. Yes, I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it through. 'Cause I'm built on you. I'm gonna make it through. 'Cause my house was built on you. Christ is my firm
you so much for joining with Generations Church and our worship experience today. If you need prayer, our hosts would love to pray with you. You can just press the prayer button and they will just stay online for a little while longer. And may God bless you and your families this week in whatever season you find yourself in. Take care.